G'day guys, and today I just want to make a quick video to help alleviate any confusion that may arrive from an upcoming video I'll be doing analysing the New South Wales election again, this time looking at the upper house or the Legislative Council. And what you'll notice in comparison to my previous video looking at the lower house election results is that this video won't have a map. And that may appear confusing to people, not showing the electoral districts and that sort of thing. Well, that's because there are no electoral districts for the upper house or the Legislative Council for the New South Wales Parliament. So what essentially this system runs off is a single transferable vote system utilising a droop quota. Now if that just sounds like a recipe for a terrible smoothie, don't worry, I'll get to unpacking it straight away. So, under the system of a single transferable vote, each voter has a single vote that is initially allocated to the most preferred candidate. So when you get the bit of ballot paper, there'll be several people who want your vote, and you can preference them, say 1, 2 and 3 and that sort of thing. So votes are totaled, and then a quota, which is the number of votes required to win a seat, is derived. So this is why we don't have to worry about electoral districts and that sort of thing, because essentially what gets someone voted into the Legislative Council is this quota number, which is a proportion of the total votes. So if their candidate achieves quota, he or she is elected, and in some single transferable vote systems, any surplus votes are transferred to other candidates in proportion to the voters' stated preferences. So essentially, if your first preference candidate doesn't meet the quota, doesn't get enough votes, well then your vote is then transferred to a second preference candidate, and so on and so forth. So if more candidates than seats remain, then the bottom candidate is eliminated, with his or her votes being transferred to other candidates as determined by the voters' stated preferences. So what that basically means if, say for example, there are 10 seats up for grabs in a certain made-up electoral council, and 12 people make the quota. 12 people get enough votes to get elected in. Well, you can't have 12 people filling 10 seats, so what you essentially do is you find the person who got the least amount of votes but still passed quota, and you eliminate them and redistribute their votes on and on until you get the amount of candidates matching their number of seats available. So that's basically it on the surface, but we're going to go into a bit more detail starting with the quota, or to be more specific, the droop quota. So the quota, of course, just to recap, is the number of votes required by a potential candidate to be elected into a seat, and it's something that is calculated every year according to a formula. So as you can see, the quota will change year to year as the number of people who are able to vote come in. Of course, New South Wales voting is compulsory. You do have to vote or you are fined. I think it's a $55 fine. Something else to keep in mind is the amount of people who donkey vote, or essentially throw away their vote in an invalid manner, scribbling on the parchment or refusing to vote for anyone. That is something that can throw off the number of total valid votes. So to calculate your droop quota, you take the total number of valid votes, you divide that by the number of seats available, plus 1, and you take that whole number and add another 1 to it. So for this year, the 2019 election, the total number of valid votes was 4,451,146. There were 21 seats up for grabs out of the 42 Legislative Council seats, because the Legislative Council has a staggered election, so only each election cycle, so every 4 years, only half the seats are up for grabs. So 21, half of 42, you add 1 to that, you take that whole number, you plus 1, and you get a rounded up number to 202,326. So that's how many votes a candidate needs to get into the Legislative Council in this year 2019. Now, as I've mentioned before, if a candidate doesn't make the quota number of votes, then their votes are then redistributed amongst other candidates based on the preferences of the voters. So if I want to preference Liberals first and they don't make the quota number, then my vote will go to my second preference, which in this case may be Labor, just as an example. Interestingly enough, once a candidate or a party makes a quota, but they have excess votes, say you need 100 votes to make quota and you get 150 votes. Well, since they didn't make the second quota number, they didn't get to 200, their 50 votes are then redistributed. Now, a big problem I see with this system for the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament is that it's more representative of high density population zones such as cities, rather than say rural New South Wales, because all you need to get elected is just a number of votes. It's not restricted by geography except by the borders of the state. So if you need to get to this quota system, if you need to get to this 200,000 votes, well, where are you going to campaign? If you just need numbers, you're not going to go around campaigning in rural New South Wales knocking on, farms every 40 kilometers or whatever. You're going to be campaigning in the higher population areas such as Sydney, maybe Orange, Bathurst, and things like that. So what essentially this could lead to is people out in the country not being very effectively represented, because what's going to happen is if you want to get elected, your platform, your sort of policy, your stances are going to be reflective of the issues faced by high density population areas such as Sydney. So you're going to talk about, congestion, public transport, sanitation in the big cities and stuff like that. You're not going to be focusing as much on rural issues. So what you're essentially having is a large portion of New South Wales, which is sparsely populated, very low population density, a lot of farms and empty land and stuff like that. A big portion of the country geographically, and therefore agriculturally, and that ties into the economy, is not being effectively represented by the system because it caters to the big cities. Thankfully though, the New South Wales government also has the lower house, the Legislative Assembly, which with its electoral districts does tend to specific geographical locations such as the electoral district of Shell Harbour, the electoral district of Orange, and things like that. That's where you get your specific geographical representation. Now I just want to read you something from the New South Wales government's own website to gain a bit of insight as to why this two-house thing exists. So the need for legislation to be passed by both houses provides protection against a government with a disciplined majority in the lower house introducing extreme measures for which it does not have broad community support. It also provides an opportunity for further consultation on proposed legislation, and for amendments to be made to legislation where required. So essentially you have this two-tiered system in order to slow down the progress of government, because the Legislative Assembly may agree on something, pass it up to the Legislative Council where it has to be further discussed. So it slows down the power of government in that regard. And as they rightfully point out, say for example you have a government with a lot of power in the Legislative Assembly because it caters specifically to the city, like let's say Sydney and the greater CBD and outer west and the Central Coast and that sort of thing, and you gain a sort of supermajority of seats in that area, well then you could have a party that continually rams through legislation that only benefits the city, because you just have those majority of city MPs deciding on legislation. If this is the case, the theory to sort of stop this thing from happening is the Legislative Council having a broader support of the wider community, as was mentioned, because the whole state votes on this. It's not just a partisan sort of geographical region area, I'm just voting for this person because he promises me free buses or something like that. You've got to consider the whole state. Who do you want representing you at the entire state level? This sounds good in theory, but I'm still a bit taken aback by this. It does still sound like a sort of tyranny of the majority sort of thing, because what you got to understand is Sydney, being a large coastal city, has a lot of electoral districts, and then you consider Greater Sydney, the South Coast and the Central Coast. There's a lot of electoral districts to win there, and there's also a lot of population. There's a lot of people living along the coast in Australia. There's not as many living out in the country, obviously. So what I'm sort of concerned is at both levels, it's more slanted towards giving a crap about urban areas, specifically these big cities, because a political party is going to campaign harder there because there's more seats to win and there's more votes to get in the Assembly and Council respectively, I should say. Anyway, that was a quick look at the voting system behind the New South Wales Upper House. It does seem to be a bit of a popular vote. All you need to do is hit this quota. It's not based on specific geographical regions. So in that sense, it could be considered almost a direct democracy with all the things that entails. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.